On November 2, 2021, a 66-year-old Spanish teacher from Fairfield, Iowa, went for her regular evening walk. She never came home. Within days, investigators identified two of her students, Jeremy Goodale and Willard Miller, both 16, as suspects. In this video, we'll look at what happened that night, how police uncovered the plan, and what ultimately led to their prison sentences. This is the unusual case of Jeremy Goodale and Willard Miller.
What was Jeremy's reasons for assisting or following through?
To quote his words, he didn't want to, quote unquote, be a pussy.
Before we get into the details of what happened that night, it's important to understand just how quickly a plan like this can spiral out of control. What started as two frustrated teens venting about a bad grade soon turned into something far darker, a calculated decision that couldn't be undone. Messages between them revealed not just anger, but intent. They weren't talking about fixing a mistake or apologizing to their teacher, they were talking about revenge. And by the time Nohema Graber took her usual evening walk in Chautauqua Park, that plan was already in motion. The following footage shows Goodall describing the murder. When Jeremy's father took the stand, the courtroom grew noticeably quieter. He described a son who, before the pandemic, was social, curious, and full of potential. A kid who loved hanging out with friends and rarely showed anger. But after months of isolation during the COVID lockdowns, he said that something in Jeremy changed.
When Jeremy was 15 years old, the COVID pandemic hit the country. How did COVID impact Jeremy's day-to-day routine?
You know, his mom kind of abandoned him. Interpersonal relationships were so important to him. And we spent 2.5 years in a global war against interpersonal interactions. It devastated him. You know, I was a single parent at that time. I had to go to work. I had to provide for the family, and I was to leave a 14-year-old kid at home by himself. He had to be online because that's how they were getting their studies. It was an utter disaster, you can imagine. He was not doing his work. He was, no matter what I seemed to do, since he had access to the internet, you know, I couldn't keep him from playing video games, and that's pretty much what he did all day.
How would you describe Jeremy?
You know, he was troubled, but he was also, you know, highly intelligent. He did extremely well at times. So as a parent, you're hopeful, and you kind of focus on the positives and hope to work toward through the difficulties. Realize that in 2021, the year this horrific crime happened, he was Student of the Month in April.
So the first finding is that the brain immaturity implications of Jeremy's age of 16 at the time of the offense are fundamental to understanding the poor judgment and the faulty values that are reflected by his participation in this offense.
Even though both Jeremy Goodale and Willard Miller were just 16 at the time of the murder, Iowa law treats certain crimes very differently. Under Iowa Code 232.8, any minor, 16 or older, who commits a forcible felony, like a first-degree murder, is automatically waived into adult court. That means the protections normally given to juveniles, like sealed records or shorter sentences, no longer apply. The law is designed for cases where the crime is so severe that the state views it as beyond the scope of juvenile rehabilitation. In this courtroom, that meant both teenagers faced the exact same penalties as adults.
Doctor, I think we discussed this a few minutes ago, but how were deficits in autonomy reflected in Jeremy's participation in this offense?
This is not Jeremy's problem. Chaden is failing Spanish, not Jeremy. Chaden may be impacted on going to an exchange program, not Jeremy. So this is not Jeremy's problem, it's Chaden's problem. Well, that's a boundary issue about who does this belong to. Then that Jeremy is so dependent on a friendship with Chaden that he can't tolerate being separated from him on this agenda.
What the doctor is describing using the terms autonomy issue is whether Jeremy was 100% in control of his own actions. This suggests that Jeremy was influenced by his accomplice to murder Miss Graber, with Jeremy's friend taking advantage of his lack of self-esteem and social skills following the COVID-19 pandemic.
I offer my sincerest apologies to the Graber family, but I know my words will never be enough. I've had time to think on what to say, and I'm sorry, truly sorry. What I've taken can never be replaced. Every day I wish I could go back and stop myself, prevent this loss and this pain that I've caused everyone.
After delivering his apology to the court, a moment which showed visible remorse and emotion, something unexpected happened. As Jeremy stepped back, his nose suddenly began to bleed. The courtroom fell silent. Some saw it as a sign of nerves, others, the physical toll of the immense pressure he was under. But whatever the cause, it added an eerie, almost symbolic weight to the moment, as if his guilt had manifested itself in real time.
Jeremy was approached by Chaden Miller 2 weeks prior to Mrs. Graber's killing. He agreed to help Chaden kill his teacher. It's not clear the level of planning and coordination that took place in the ensuing 2 weeks. But the day before her death, on November 1st, he agreed to meet up with Chaden. He did stalk Mrs. Graber along with Chaden to the scene of the crime, casing it. And in fact, I think he testified that at the top of the hill, they did bump into Mrs. Graber and did say hello. He didn't call off the act at that point. And he didn't call off the act when he was sitting with Zoe Thintel at the park in the 45 minutes leading up to Chaden arriving. It's unclear what the defendant's mental state was. However, there were so many opportunities for him to change his mind. Following the brutal conduct of the defendant and co-defendant in the killing of Mrs. Graber, Mr. Goodale agreed to proffer evidence against the co-defendant in this case. He agreed to testify against him, and he took full accountability and he pled guilty to the first-degree premeditated murder of Nohema Graber, and that is worthy of some consideration.
Based on all of that, we're asking, again, for the court to recognize that Jeremy Goodale is receiving the maximum punishment as provided by law, life in prison. All we are asking for is the court not to make the premature decision now as to when it will be appropriate for him to be released. The Board of Parole is in that position. If Mr. Goodale is not adequately rehabilitated, as again our sentencing memorandum indicates, the Board of Parole will make the right decision.
This is a strategic move from Jeremy's defense team. From the very beginning, Jeremy has admitted full guilt and cooperated completely with authorities. His lawyer is capitalizing on this image of remorse, using it as leverage to argue for an indeterminate parole sentence. In other words, instead of the judge setting a fixed minimum term, like 25 years, Jeremy's fate would rest in the hands of a parole board. They'd evaluate his progress over time and decide, meeting by meeting, whether he's ready to be released.
You pled guilty to first-degree murder and acknowledged your actions. While you certainly have the right to exercise your constitutional rights to a trial, to a jury, in a different place. Like Mr. Miller, by pleading guilty, you spared the defendant's family, witnesses, and community a traumatic trial. Regarding the severity of the offense, which is factor H, including any of the following: the commission of the murder while participating in another felony, a number of victims, and the heinous, brutal, cruel matter of murder, including whether the murder was the result of torture. I've mentioned the offense is heinous, unusually heinous and cruel, by stalking Ms. Graber and repeatedly hitting her with a bat. Again, I'm required to find that aggravating. And you have expressed genuine remorse that I did not see from your co-defendant. And this factor and the capacity to appreciate the criminality of your conduct, I think, is a mitigating factor.
The judge ultimately sentenced Jeremy to life in prison, with the opportunity for parole only after 35 years. He was also ordered to pay the victim's family a sum of $150,000. In response to calls that Jeremy was too young for this penalty, the judge replied with one sentence: "Evil does not have a birthday." Do you think Jeremy's sentence was fair?